Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Tonight we revisit the situation in eastern Ladakh, the Western Front which remains tense and where troops from People's Liberation Army and the Indian Army were involved in a bloody clash, the worst in more than 45 years. While the Indian government changed the rules of engagement, instructing troops to carry and use weapons in an extraordinary situation, the confrontation last month on June 15 has badly dented the carefully crafted image of the Indian Army and Narendra Modi's muscular approach to neighbors. The Indian government now claims that a disengagement has been worked out after the phone call between India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and China's State Councillor and Minister of Foreign Affairs Wang Yi. The Chinese Foreign Ministry statement, however, has no mention of any agreement. I repeat, the word agreement on de-escalation or disengagement. The term used is positive consensus, and the ministry spokesperson Lijian Zhao said both sides were, and I quote, taking effective measures to disengage and ease the situation on the border, unquote. China also blamed India for the Galwan Valley clash. The statement reads, the merits of the recent incident in the Galwan Valley in the western section of the China-India border are clear, and China will continue to vigorously defend its territorial sovereignty and safeguard peace in the border areas, unquote. Sources within the Indian military say that a mutual pullback agreement would effectively result in the loss of Indian territory, with Chinese troops already having intruded more than 2 kilometers into areas that India has traditionally claimed, occupied, and patrolled. A mutual pullback of 2 kilometers would create a 4-kilometer deep buffer zone that would lie entirely in Indian territory. That's the view of the Indian Army sources. To discuss the situation further, we are joined from General Waheed Arshad, former Chief of General Staff of Pakistan Army, Dr. Kamran Bokhari, Director of Analytical Development at the Center for Global Policy, and we shall also be joined by Qinduo Xu, political analyst and host of Dialogue Weekend at CGTN. Mr. Qinduo is also senior fellow at the Pangol Institution, a Beijing-based policy think tank. So let me get straight to the point. General Arshad, what do you think of this policy of disengagement? India is kind of putting a different construct on it, whereas the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs statement makes it very clear that China's pullback is not something which is actually conceding any ground to India.
Yes, I think both countries are, especially India, is trying to construct a narrative which could sort of lessen the embarrassment after 15th of June, especially in the domestic framework, because, and if you recollect, the Indian Prime Minister actually a couple of weeks back gave a statement that no intrusion has taken place in the Indian territory. And that was building a sort of ground or basis for whatever was going to happen in terms of discussion between the two sides. And I don't think the Chinese are going to sort of pull back and let go of the advantage which they have gained in terms of, positioning their troops. Because it's not only Galwan Valley, if you look at the extent of Chinese incursion, it's almost 200 kilometer stretch.
Yes.
And from Dapsang Plains in the north to Pangong Lake in the south, it's a huge stretch, and a lot of incursions have been made. And as we all know, China is very sensitive to the border area, especially when it is bordering Tibet and their main highway. So it's after August 5, Indian constitutional changes to the occupied territory. The creeping expansionism by the Indians obviously had to be checkmated by the Chinese. And I don't think that the Chinese are going to let go of the advantage which they have gained. And I think they've also given a very clear message that this is a no-go. As far as the South Asian situation is concerned, the border issue is concerned, the Chinese will never back down, and the Indians need to live with whatever is happening.
One of the things, General Arshad, that one senses about China's approach, and which I'm afraid I would say is, perhaps very different from how the subcontinentals think, is that the tactical pieces are important only to the extent that they actually go into the broader, larger strategic mosaic. So if one looks at it like that, what exactly do you think is the larger strategic mosaic?
Basically, it was a strategic miscalculation by the Indians. They read the whole strategic environment wrong, and which led to tactical actions which fired back. Now, look at the strategic picture. In my view, I think the Indians thought that now that the Chinese are under pressure because of COVID, post-COVID economic situation, the events in Hong Kong, the emerging rivalry between the U.S. pressure on Chinese, the U.S.-China sort of confrontation perking up, and whatever is happening in the South China Sea and otherwise superpower rivalry, the Indians wanted to gain advantage out of it by, so to speak, by positioning themselves as a strategic ally of the United States and giving a message that they can handle the Chinese along the South Asian borders, south of China. And also, sort of, at the same time, they also thought that this is a ripe opportunity for expanding their footprint in the disputed area, the line of actual control. They also wanted to, I think, sort of ward off internal pressures building up because of mishandling of COVID, the minority issues, the fight between the Hindutva RSS ideology versus the minorities, whatever is the unprecedented repression in Kashmir, creating a lot of problems. So I think it was 4 or 5 strategic issues which brought them to take the strategic decision which fired back. And I think it was a strategic miscalculation. As far as the Chinese is concerned, I think there is great strategic clarity on their part. They, while they are grappling with the U.S. Pressures, they are grappling with the tiff with the Australians and the EU, and also statements by the Quad. They are doing a good job of whatever is post-COVID situation there, both in terms of economics as well as geopolitics. And there was no way the Chinese could let this situation carry on, the Indian sort of expansion and the rhetoric by the leadership to create a situation where they would be faced with a fait accompli by seeing Indian troops in the disputed territory. So I think it was a strategic miscalculation by the Indians, which after this whole agreement, it is very clear that the Chinese are where they were and where they wanted to be.
Okay. General Arshad, stay with me. Let me pull in Dr. Bokhari here also. Dr. Bokhari, I was watching a program that you moderated, and I was also reading this article that's appeared in War on the Rocks by Christopher Clary and Vipin Narang. They obviously are looking at what choices India has, and they say that the choices are from bad to worse to the ugly. Now, one of the approaches that are being taken, especially analyses coming out of the West, is to either clearly or implicitly put the blame on Beijing for being aggressive or for being irredentist. No one has really talked about 2 developments. One, of course, the August 5th development, which annexed the illegally occupied territory, and then the issuance of maps that show Aksai Chin as part of India, and the statements by some Indian leaders, including Amit Shah, who talked about Indian claim on Aksai Chin. So give me your sense of how you look at this confrontation and how you think it is likely to unfold.
Thank you, Ejaz. I think that 2 things are very clear. One is that there's a difference between what has appeared in the U.S. open sources and what the government has been doing. As far as August 5th is concerned from last year, the revocation of Article 370 and the annexation and bifurcation of the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir, I think there's been severe condemnation on the part of the U.S. press. There are a lot of articles that continue to come out, although not with that volume, because as you know, other things take over, and now we're in a COVID world, so there are other issues. But I think that there is enough to suggest that, in the Western press, not just the American press, there was severe condemnation of what India was doing. India's heavy swing towards a right-wing Hindu nationalism. That's also getting a lot of, if you will, condemnation and criticism. But when it comes to China and India, obviously there's a larger strategic framework here. The Americans are under no illusion that the Indians will, in the near term or foreseeable future, be able to serve as an effective ally to counter to China. It's because of inherent Indian weakness vis-a-vis Beijing. And so I think we need to separate those two things out. So on one hand, yes, India is condemned for domestic policies, but on the foreign policy front, India is still an ally. And but it's not the only. As you know, that the Pentagon not too long ago renamed Pacific Command to Indo-Pacific, and that's a very large symbolic move to say, okay, India is now part of this in Asia that is going to help the United States contain Chinese moves. But of course, those are symbolic. Battle space realities are very different. And I think that the U.S. is still watching all of this, and quite frankly, between being, bandwidth being stretched in Washington, and just trying to make sense of it, I don't think the U.S. has a position on it. Now, as far as the implications for China, India, and of course Pakistan is concerned, as I wrote in my piece very early on after the reports came out of the serious clash on June 15th, effectively there's a long-term new reality. There is an active three-actor battle space in the region of Kashmir. The LAC has not gained the same sort of level of flashpoint as is the LOC, but I think that from an Indian point of view, they now have to calculate that they will be dealing with Islamabad and Beijing in this space for a very long time to come. And then they have to assume that there's going to be cooperation, coordination between the Pakistanis and the Chinese.
Okay. Stay with me. Let me go back to General Arshad. General Arshad, we spoke about this before also on this program, and you talked about China's superior strategic orientation. Even with this pullback and this buffer zone created, now this is an area that will be denied to the Indian military as far as patrols are concerned or as far as any movement into this area is concerned. Whereas if and when, it seems operationally, if and when the Chinese army decides that they want to return to their forward positions, they can do that without any problem.
Yes, as if the reports are true that, there has been this understanding or agreement, so to speak, that the Indian side will not carry out patrolling in the area where the Chinese were. There's especially the PP-14 on the Galwan River bend. And the Chinese have pulled back, but they've also ensured, if this is true, no Indian troops would venture into that area. Now, that effectively means that when the Chinese came into that area, they had a better time and space, advantage. They still have the same. They can always come back and again get into PP-14 and other areas. So they have ensured their own interest. Secondly, post June 15 and the clash and the casualties and the hype, both sides have now carried out deployments. And there is a large, I believe, deployments going on the Indian side as well as the Chinese side. And they have weaponized those deployments. I don't think that the earlier agreement of sort of non-weaponized discussions and meetings and activity would stay as it was before. It is going to stay. It is going to be weaponized. So I think that from purely a military standpoint, I think the Chinese did gain an upper hand, and they obviously will never give up that upper hand, because they are not facing a situation where they've been forced to give up the upper hand which they got. There's no pressure on them. Actually, the pressure is on on the Indians, and they have actually agreed on this area being not their area.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was General Waheed Arshad speaking with us. Let me go back to Dr. Kamran Bokhari. Kamran, one assessment that has come out of Washington is that Xi Jinping has been under pressure because of, as they say, mishandling of the COVID-19 crisis. Now, I find it interesting also and a bit ironic also that if you go back to the 62 clash, similar assessments were coming out at that time with reference to Mao's Great Leap Forward policy and the fact that it was a major failure and there were lots of internal turmoil, and therefore Mao wanted to do this. So do you really think that the COVID-19 crisis is a factor that one can use or add so much weight to in terms of what Beijing is doing either in South China Sea or in Hong Kong or, as in this case, Eastern Ladakh?
So as far as COVID-19 is concerned, I think that does constrain maybe, some of China's abilities on the micro level, on the tactical level. But I don't think that this has been shaped heavily by COVID-19. These moves are ongoing. These are not new. Where to press and how hard is something that COVID-19 can shape. But by and large, the Chinese have been doing this along their periphery for a very long time. And, they have a well-known strategy of, 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, and they continuously keep doing this. So I don't think that, COVID-19 has made Xi Jinping any more, weak than he may already be. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, like any actor, the Xi regime in Beijing is under pressure from a variety of situations. I mean, and COVID is just sort of the most recent. So I think the Chinese have adapted to the fact that they need to maintain full employment. They have, the usual issues of the non-performing loans stacking up and racking up over time and hitting the reset button. BRI, which CPEC is the biggest venture within the Belt and Road Initiative. It's all part of the Chinese efforts to readjust to a new economic situation, or at least try to readjust to where, Chinese exports, the demand for Chinese exports because of the global economic downturn, and this is all, pre-COVID, they've adjusted. They keep adjusting. They have the room to adjust. Not that they make a whole lot of headway, and we probably wouldn't know because there is a certain level of, if you will, opaqueness in terms of our ability, the outside world's ability to really understand where the Chinese are. And then if everything gets addressed in a public relations manner. So having said that, so I don't think COVID is the issue here right now. I think this is a long-term thing. This has been going on for a while. The Chinese gamed this out, although, they may not have, expected that the clash would be this serious. But I think that here the Chinese, are part of a longer game, and they're patient, and they have room to maneuver.
Okay. Kamran, stay with me. I'm also joined by Qinduo Xu, who's a political analyst and host of Dialogue Weekend at CGTN. Mr. Qinduo is also senior fellow at the Pangol Institution, a Beijing-based policy think tank. Mr. Qinduo, thank you so much for being on the program. We're, of course, talking about the Eastern Ladakh standoff and the recent diplomatic efforts, the phone call between the Chinese foreign minister and the Indian national security advisor. Now, India is saying that there is an agreement now, whereas the Chinese foreign ministry statement does not use the term agreement. It talks about disengagement, it talks about a positive consensus, but it does not say that there is an agreement. So give us your sense of what exactly is going on.
Well, I think on the political level, on the diplomatic level, both sides, came to the understanding that we should solve the disputes through diplomacy, through talking to each other. The diplomatic talks between the two representatives of the two governments, that goes along with there's another disengagement between the two militaries from both China and India. So I think, while they are not using the agreement, probably that's too formal a word over there. It's more like a step-by-step measure, temporary step-by-step, disengagement measures. So you took the first step by both sides, and then we will look at the second step. People are talking about, right now we have the withdrawal of troops from the Chinese side and also from the Indian side. So they are talking about building a buffer zone, which is about 4 to 5 kilometers wide. And then they say another section that will be possibly also withdrawal of troops and also maybe a similar buffer zone to be established. Until all those finished, I think, people are probably more cautious instead of using we have a final conclusion how to solve this problem.
Mr. Qinduo, one of the questions that has, basically vexed everyone in the region also and in the US also is the timing of these PLA incursions, or what India calls incursions. So can you tell us how to resolve this issue and what exactly caused this at this point in time?
Good point. From the Chinese side, people tend to believe that some people, probably in New Delhi, saw that there is a rising tension between China and the United States, and also there's a COVID-19 situation over there. They saw somehow, they say there's an opportunity. They see there is a vulnerability on the Chinese side. Some people probably wanted to profit from the rising tension between Beijing and Washington. So that's why you see the border clash. And also I want to, just stress a little bit here. Prime Minister Modi made it publicly. There's no Chinese incursion. And there's no loss of army outposts from the Indian side. And also from the Chinese version, the clashes, it happened on the Chinese side, on the land under the Chinese control. So you can see it's the Indian troops. They basically ventured into the Chinese side during nighttime, and they provoked the Chinese military soldiers over there. And then there's a physical fight between the two sides. So that resulted the loss of 20 soldiers on the Indian side, and also
Mr. Qinduo, that's an interesting point. Stay with me. Let me quickly go back to Dr. Kamran Bokhari. Kamran, one of the things, and this was a televised live address where the Indian Prime Minister said there has been no incursion. As a matter of fact, when he said that, he actually refuted an earlier statement by his own foreign minister who talked about incursions. Now, the Chinese have constantly maintained that they were on their side. So give me a sense of, was this an attempt by the Indian Prime Minister to somehow play it down, or, not to have to lose any more face?
I think you're right, Ejaz. I think that the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, found himself trapped in a very difficult situation where his own media, people who watched this very carefully in New Delhi and other parts of India, people who are members of the Indian, security establishment, prominent people who watch these things, they came out writing that, we've lost territory, and it was very clear. So obviously there is a public relations imperative on the part of the Modi government to say, to kind of explain it away, as we say here in the United States. So how do we explain it away or attempt to explain it away? And I think that that's basically what he chose. I mean, it's you're in a difficult situation. You have no options, and there you have to put the best face up. And this isn't just India or the Modi government. This can be applied anywhere if you find a leader in a very tough situation all of a sudden. I really think that the Indians were caught off guard. My view, respectfully, is that the Chinese had, taken advantage of the Indians not looking per se, and they moved it in and created a new reality, a fait accompli on the ground. And when the Indians realized, they tried to reverse it, and by that time, I think it was too late. Now, the other thing, which sort of, I'd like to sort of make sense of what our guest was saying, I think that what it really explains this whole situation is that both sides have a desired line, if you will. Where does the line run? And there is no consensus on that. There have been many agreements over the years, but everybody's operating from a different line. So if you measure from your line, then you can make the argument, at least rhetorically, that, hey, this happened on the other side or this happened on the other side. So I think that's at the heart of this.
Absolutely, that's correct. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Bokhari speaking with us. Before I wrap up this segment, let me go back to Mr. Qinduo here. Mr. Qinduo, what's the play now? And also I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the timing. Is there also the factor of India's illegal annexation of Ladakh and also the maps that they put out which show Aisha as part of India?
From the Chinese point of view, in particular the government point of view, that is like Indian side, Indian suitors have been basically intruding we call it the line of control, right? The territory under the Chinese actual control frequently, actually, in the recent times. And of course, even after the military talked to each other to agree to disengage, and that happened after the, both sides agreeing to disengage. So on June 15th, so that happened. Obviously, even if you follow the Prime Minister of Modi of India, I mean, if you don't believe what the Prime Minister says, and then who you are going to talk to? I know there's a rising nationalism in India. People seems to me like they are not able to acknowledge, yes, there's a loss of soldiers on the Indian side, but probably it's them to blame. It's not the Chinese to blame.
Okay.
It's them who started this brawl. So I think the Chinese side, yes, we are dealing with
Mr. Qinduo, thank you for speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to discuss India's politicization of the Kulbhushan Jadhav case. Jadhav, a serving Indian naval officer working for India's external intelligence agency Research and Analysis Wing, was captured by Pakistan in 2017. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Before we move on to the case of Kulbhushan Jadhav, the serving Indian naval officer working for India's external intelligence agency RNAW, let's remember Burhan Wani, the Kashmiri boy who was martyred 4 years ago this day by Indian occupation forces. He remains the icon for Kashmiri's struggle against India's illegal occupation of Kashmir. Now, the other part of the story that we want to discuss is about Kulbhushan Jadhav. Islamabad has asked New Delhi to cooperate with Pakistan and respect the judicial process in Indian spy Kulbhushan Jadhav's case. At a press conference, DG South Asia and SAC in the Foreign Office, Waheed Hafiz, said India has been invited to initiate review and reconsideration proceedings in the case before 19th July. Hafiz said Pakistan had implemented the decision of the International Court of Justice by twice granting consular access to Jadhav. Additional Attorney General Ahmed Irfan said New Delhi requested that an Indian lawyer should be allowed to represent Jadhav for a review petition. He said only a Pakistani lawyer with a license to appear before courts could represent the naval officer, but he said a legal team from India could come and assist the Pakistani lawyer for the case. Pakistan promulgated the review and reconsideration ordinance on May 20th, allowing for filing a review petition within 60 days. To discuss the situation in Kashmir, as also the Kulbhushan Jadhav case, I'm joined by Ms. Aisha Farooqui, spokesperson, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Shayan Ahmed, who's a senior researcher at Research Society of International Law. Before I get to the Jadhav case, Ms. Farooqui, about Kashmir. It's getting from bad to worse to the ugly. We saw that shocking picture of a toddler, 3-year-old, sitting on the bullet-riddled chest of his grandfather. It's something that is heart-wrenching. What exactly are we? I know we are taking a lot of diplomatic measures and the rest of it, but is someone really listening?
8th July 2016 is when Burhan Wani, a 24-year-old Kashmiri boy, basically gave his life for the Kashmiri cause. And we pay tribute to the courage of Burhan Wani and all the young people, the innocent children, women, who are at the forefront of this struggle. You're absolutely right. The images that we saw from Sopore were truly heart-wrenching, and I think the Indian occupation forces have taken their inhumanity and their oppression to another level, a very disturbing level, if I may add. Is anyone listening? While the reaction from the international community and the actions that need to be taken at a collective level are definitely not there yet. However, I think in the last 1 year alone, you can traverse yourself and look back and see that condemnation of what India is doing through its occupation forces in occupied Jammu and Kashmir have gone up several notches. And in multiple forums, in multiple voices have emerged from across the world to condemn the situation, which is, you're absolutely right, it is deteriorating by the day.
Absolutely.
What we need to see is collective action, legal action against India.
Now that's an important, Farooqui. And on that, for instance, another development which we've been talking about, as a matter of fact, right from the day, 5th August, when India illegally annexed and occupied territory, we were talking about this change of, demography. Now with the new domicile laws and they're fast-tracking it. So this is one thing. And I was talking to some experts on this program a couple of weeks ago, and they talked about the fact that this is completely illegal, and this can also be construed as a war crime. Now, I want to know, are we looking at this seriously in terms of invoking some international body, the ICJ or whatever, in order to present this case before the world?
Absolutely. There's a lot of thinking on what is the practical way forward to take up this particular case, and which basically seeks to completely change the demography and the identity of the Kashmiri people. And I want to draw your attention to our permanent mission in New York yesterday, where permanent representative Ambassador Munir Akram on the floor during the debate on counterterrorism spoke about India's war crimes in Jammu and Kashmir and the state sponsorship of terrorism by India in Pakistan. So there are multiple lines of thinking that are under consideration. And in the days and weeks ahead, we hope to converge upon a particular line of action.
Okay, thank you so much. That was Ms. Aisha Farooqui, spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, speaking with us. Let me go straight to Shayan Ahmed. Shayan Ahmed, give us a sense of what exactly is happening with this Jadhav case, the serving naval officer working for India's research and analysis wing.
So from a legal standpoint, what we're seeing here that the International Court of Justice mandated Pakistan to review and reconsider the case. And in terms of the submissions by the Councils of Pakistan, what was deemed as the appropriate forum was the High Courts of Pakistan. So a petition obviously has to be brought before the High Courts of Pakistan by either the person who is aggrieved, in this case that would be Jadhav, or the state on behalf of which a claim is being brought, which would be India. So we see that in either of these cases, this is not being met. And we've seen that Pakistan has complied with the directions of the International Court of Justice, not just in terms of providing consular access, but if we specifically see some of the paragraphs of the judgment, we see that the International Court of Justice stated that specific laws, if need be, could be promulgated. And we see Pakistan has done that as well through the Ordinance of May 2020. Now, the question here is a very political one. This is basically what we see as a delay tactic, because if we read the judgment, we see that the obligation of effective review and reconsiderations needs to be undertaken irrespective of whether a claim is brought before the high courts or not. That is Pakistan's obligation. So what India is trying to do here is to delay this measure and possibly try to take this issue back to the International Court of Justice or to the Security Council. Now, as to the first point of the International Court of Justice, the case, contrary to what the Indian Consul Harish Salve said a month ago, the case cannot be taken back to the International Court of Justice. And why is this? This is because the appeal jurisdiction or the reconsideration jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice is very limited. So either a case can be taken in circumstances where a new fact has come to light, which would be so decisive that if the parties knew of it before the judgment, it would alter the judgment. We see that this is not the case here. The second scope of review before the International Court of Justice or a forum of appeal is when you need to interpret or sort of shed light on a specific portion of the judgment. And we see that this was tried by Mexico against the United States in prior cases. And the court stated that any measures of implementation cannot be taken before it. So only the meaning as to the judgment and its operative portions can be taken before it. So we see that the meaning is clear. Now, India is only left with the Security Council. And we see that the measures being taken by Pakistan, there is virtually no way in which India can pass successfully a resolution to say that Pakistan did not comply with the judgment of the International Court of Justice.
Okay, thank you, sir. That was a very, very eloquent, Shayan Ahmed. But explain to the viewers, since this spy, and he's not just a spy, he was also funding and facilitating terror attacks inside Pakistan, so it's also about sabotage. He has already been sentenced to death by a military court. Now, are we saying that this review and reconsideration for the case to go to the High Court, a Pakistani High Court, a Pakistani lawyer will represent him, and an Indian legal team can be there on the ground to facilitate the review of that? Is that sense correct?
Yes, absolutely. So if we look at the case was very narrow in nature. So the jurisdiction which was brought was with regard to the right to consular access. So what we see here is that independent of the conduct of the accused, all that the courts have to do here is to see whether, assuming right of consular access was provided, what difference would it make to the judgment? Now, India knows it would have made no difference to the actual judgment by the military courts. And that is precisely why India is very reluctant to approach the high courts of Pakistan, even though Pakistan is providing them ample opportunity to do so.
So when we say that they're politicizing the case, this is about the delaying tactics. This is not about the substance of the issue, but this is simply to earn brownie points before the world?
Absolutely, because if you see whenever the appeal is going to come before the court, you see that there is a chance that the evidence before the military courts is also going to be made public before the high courts. That is a very real likely possibility. And we see that when we see the confession, even if right to consular access was provided, there's a very narrow remit through which we could assume that the judgment of the military courts could have been altered. So to me, it's not a very legal question. It's a very political question and more of a delay tactic on there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shayan Ahmed. Very enlightening. This is all from In Focus this week. We shall see you next Monday at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.